Welcome to Spiritual Shenanigans, the podcast where science meets spirituality, where we explore the mysteries of the mind and the vastness of the universe. If you're someone who is fascinated by the stars and intrigued by the power of the mind and the depths of human consciousness, then join us as we delve into the realms of astral travel, alien encounters, and share tools and tips for practical spirituality. Each week, we'll journey beyond the ordinary, exploring topics that expand our awareness. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, a scientist or a seeker, Spiritual Shenanigans offers a playful space where open minds come together to explore the extraordinary.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jace. Welcome to Spiritual Shenanigans. I am here with Ryan.
Hello.
Nudrat.
Hello.
And Saidah.
Hi.
And this is our very first episode, and we are here to teach you about spirituality.
Thanks, Jace. So this is our very first episode, and we're so excited to have you here. We're hoping to teach you some tools and tips on practical spirituality that will help you to expand your consciousness. And since this is our first episode, we're going to start with telling you just a little bit about ourselves, how we know each other, and how we came into our spiritual paths. So we've all had some really exciting experiences, some really interesting journeys, and we would love to tell you a little bit more about that. So to start off, two of us are twins. You can probably guess who that is, me and Nudrat.
Yeah.
And then Jace, who you heard in our intro, is Nudrat's son, so
Yep.
my nephew. So Nudrat and I obviously have known each other since birth, and then we met Ryan 15 years ago.
In 2009.
That's right, 2009. And we're all connected kind of by our interest in spirituality and many other interesting things. I think we can, I guess, kind of start with, Saidah and I we've kind of always had an interest in all of these topics as early back as I can remember. We were at the library taking out witchcraft books, astrology,
Playing with a Ouija board.
yes, things that we probably should not have been doing. It was something that kind of always spoke to us, like the whole world of mysticism was something that always fascinated us. Ryan, was that the case for you too? Because I think I do remember you saying you also had that interest as a child.
Because I always had an interest in how things worked on a natural level, and like even though it started out more just purely sensory related, eventually I got beyond that and into like the whole spiritual aspect of causality. So that's what really got me into it. Like I was very mystical, I guess, as a child. I was into the more mystical aspects of religion, of Christianity and Buddhism. And then I kind of expanded a little bit more. When I was older, I guess you could say I was a pantheist in that I saw God in everything in the universe. And then from there, I kind of got beyond the senses and into more like mystical experiences beyond like the mental.
Yeah, that definitely resonates, Ryan, because I think for us it kind of started more with the mysticism and just like, fascination with things like witchcraft. And, we grew up in a pretty religious household and neither of us really ever resonated with that. So we kind of were always like on the search for like what else is out there. There's got to be something else that makes sense for us. And I think the first time that I actually found something that made sense was when I started reading about past lives and, right, all of those things, soul contracts, soul family. The first book that we read that really stood out to me was Many Lives, Many Masters. And shortly after that, I read a lot of Michael Newton, Destiny of Souls and Journey of Souls. And it was the first time in my life that I felt like something actually made sense compared to like the religions that I just always felt like those totally didn't resonate.
So Nudrat, do you have any experiences that kind of really triggered your interest beyond just a casual interest and made you really like take it more seriously?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think definitely for sure, Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters. I think I really resonated with that, because by the time I read that book, I believe it was like in high school, a friend gave it to me. I was actually already starting to develop an interest in mental health. And Brian Weiss is actually a psychiatrist who spontaneously started regressing patients back to past lives and noticed that they were healing like so much faster than they would with traditional talk therapy. So that was something that like really made me want to further explore past life regression and reincarnation and all of those things as like, some sort of healing modality. And I also feel that I had the same sort of effects with The Secret when the book and the movie came out. I believe that was in 2008 or so. That was definitely that triggered a second sort of awakening in me, because it showed me like this whole world of manifestation. And I, of course, had like all the vision boards and did all the things. And I really, for the first time, saw all these tangible results in my life. Like I was able to manifest all these things. I manifested my current husband. I manifested the nursing school that I got into. I manifested my first nursing job out of nursing school. So it was really crazy, because literally everything that I put on my vision board that year actually came true. And that's when I was like, wow, this is really powerful. There's something else here.
Is actually very powerful. Not many people know about that because it deals directly with the subconscious mind, and not real, and that's a big black box in today's psychology field. People don't really understand what's going on with the subconscious mind, but it's very powerful in actually molding and driving conscious thoughts without us really knowing about that. So that's something that we'll talk about more when we get into dreams, because that's all about the subconscious state. So, Saidah, do you have any?
Yeah. So, I mean, as we mentioned, obviously Nudrat and I are twins. So growing up, like we did everything together, and definitely exploring our spiritual paths was something that we were doing together. So yeah, similarly to Nudrat, definitely Brian Weiss. I remember we actually went to his workshop and had like a past life regression sort of session there. And I remember like seeing things and like realizing like, wow, okay, this is real. And I actually still remember that I had a vision that I told my mom about, and she told me that it was true, like it happened. So there was no denying that it was true. And yeah, similarly, The Secret. I mean, back then nobody really was talking about manifestation or knew what it was, but we were into like all of it, the vision boards. And I remember like literally when I started exploring this stuff is when my life really started to change, and I started to see some real results, but unlike anything that had ever, I had ever thought about or thought was possible.
And, I want to add kind of on the other side of the spectrum, I think we have to mention also that there were some negative experiences that we had that also kind of,
Oh yes, lots of belief.
yeah, there was a period in high school, at the end of high school, where we really got into using the Ouija board a lot. And, it kind of started off like just a bunch of us friends playing around with the Ouija board. It was pretty innocent. The usual stuff that teenage girls are asking about. But then after some time of us kind of starting to do that on our own, a few of us realized that we had some sort of negative, I don't know, I guess attachment. And it was the first time in my life that I remember feeling and sensing energy, which, I mean, I didn't, prior to that, I didn't even know that I had those abilities. But unfortunately, my introduction was a negative one. But it really did make me also, a believer that these things do exist alongside us.
Right. And yeah, exactly. So our first experience was unfortunately negative because back then, we just kind of opened ourselves up to these energies, and we had no idea, that it was important to protect your energy or like what to do when you're calling in energies, or that you could potentially connect with, negative entities along with positive. And yeah, I mean, obviously now that we're older, we realize what happened. But I think, in a way that actually did kind of shut us off from exploring our abilities, and maybe even like following our intuition after that, just because we had such a negative experience. So we'll definitely get more into that in other future episodes, but yeah, I think you're right. It's important to mention that along with like our positive manifestation and all of that, like we did have a few like issues along the way down our spiritual path.
Ryan, did you ever have like any paranormal experiences as like a kid or a teenager that you remember?
Well, I was always able to kind of lucid dream to a point, And this happened when I was younger, as a teenager in the 20s. But I didn't really understand what was happening. It was more of a thing where I just was able to control my dreams. I didn't know about projection or astral travel or astral bodies even. Like that wasn't even a part of like any training that I ever had. So it was all totally alien to my own purview. So I'd say like the first major spiritual experience that I had was back maybe about like maybe 1 or 2 years, I think 2 years after I met you guys, where like I would have these experiences where I would just wake up at like same time every morning, like a couple of days a week, like 5, 6 a.m. And I would hear this voice, first of all, and it wasn't speaking English. I have no idea what language it was, but it was very like scary to me. And all I saw was like bright lights, like above my bed. It was like a bright yellow orb. And I was like looking into it and I was paralyzed. So I guess you can call that sleep paralysis. And at the time, it was very scary. And the reason that I was experiencing this was because I had been doing meditations for about 4 months. So at the time, I was more into like a pantheistic state where I just believed in the universe. And I was doing meditations just because like I knew it had benefits and that it could help me in my day-to-day life. But I wasn't expecting any spiritual experiences to that degree. So I basically darted into the other world and it scared me, just like you guys were scared. And at first I stopped doing things for like several months, but like I kept like once you wake up, like you can't really go back to your old life. Then I started exploring again. And I guess we can, yeah. So for a long story short, that was one of my spirit guides that came to me during that time. But of course, at the time, I had no idea. It was just like really scary. I'm like, wow, angels are really scary, just like the Bible says. So who knew? So it was like a feeling that if you're in the presence of something so powerful that it could just like crush you in a second. That's how I felt. So it was scary, but it was scary, and it sounded negative, but ultimately it was positive because that was one of my spirit guides and it was what kind of like, got me into spirituality. And one thing I could say is that this happened like a few times, and then like around the third time, I bought a tape recorder and and was like, okay, as soon as the spirit comes, I'm awake. This is real, so I'm gonna record it so I can hear it on tape and everyone can hear it. And the next time that happened, sure enough, I went to click the record on the tape recorder, and then nothing happened, and I didn't know why. So I looked down and I saw that I was in bed, like but my body was in bed and I was about 3 feet above my bed, floating in my astral body, which I didn't know was real at the time. So I thought I was levitating, which really scared me even more. So so that was, yeah. So eventually I found out about the astral body, and then I did the research on this and kind of figured out what was happening, that I was leaving my body and that my body was asleep, but my mind and consciousness were still awake because of the meditations that I was doing. Which usually they don't uncouple like that. Normally, when your body is asleep, your mind is asleep too, and that's when you go into dream state. But when you do these types of meditation that are really hardcore meditation for like every day, that's when your mind stays active and awake, even when your body falls asleep. So that's when you could kind of do these things and enter into the astral world. And we're gonna have at least one episode on that, so I could. Well, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, wow, that's it. It's so funny. Like hearing you say that, like I wonder if whatever we encountered, like maybe it wasn't negative. Maybe it was negative to us because we had no idea what was going on and we were just so scared and just back then like automatically associated any sort of spirits with negative entities. But like I said, we'll get more into detail maybe in a future episode because to this day, I have been too scared to even talk about what happened. But now in hindsight, after hearing what Ryan said, like it's true, like it's just the feeling of such a large unknown, like a strong presence that is so foreign to you that it's just scary. But, maybe it wasn't negative. Who knows?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess now that we know more about like frequency and different frequencies and how it can feel unsettling when you encounter something that's operating at a much different frequency from you, it's probably would make sense to think that potentially what we encountered was not negative. It was just something that felt so uncomfortable or so different than the energy that we're used to that it scared us. And yeah, it definitely shut us off for a while, I think. We did not mess with the Ouija board after that, and I think we kind of stopped exploring some of those earlier interests in witchcraft for a while after that.
So that's really interesting because one thing I've noticed is that sometimes when you first get to a certain point on your spiritual path, it could seem very scary and negative, but then once you commune with that entity that's trying to talk to you, to communicate with you, then you kind of get on their level like over the course of time. Like, and then by maybe like the fourth or fifth time you experience that same guide, then suddenly you're on the same wavelength and you kind of just flow in and it feels more natural. Like you don't get that initial sense of dread anymore, like because you're on the same level as them. Like for example, we're humans, so we've only been on this planet for like what, like not very long, just a few decades, and they've been around for maybe thousands, millions of years. So it's like we're just infants next to them. So we kind of have that, like when we're in their presence, it feels like we're infants because they're so much bigger and more powerful than us. Some of these beings, there are others that might be lower beings or parasitic entities, but I'm talking about the real deal ones, the spirit guides, the ones that teach us.
That's a good point, Ryan. It's definitely important to make that distinction. That at first it can be hard to distinguish between the two, between light or dark.
Yeah, so like we said, for us, I think for a while, probably a few years after that, we kind of did not dabble in spirituality at all. And I would say when I guess you could maybe even call this our second spiritual awakening, when we really started to get back into it and started to finally get a better understanding about how energies and frequencies work, is when we got into energy healing. So that was in 2015. And both of us, me and Nujat, we actually went on a past life regression retreat in Sedona, Arizona, which, by the way, is the most beautiful and mystical place. Like so many energy vortexes, like just you can really feel the energy shifts when you're there. But anyway, so we went on this yoga retreat there, where we had past life regression sessions, which were extremely interesting also. But then later that same, and actually I remember on that trip is when I bought my very first crystal. So it's also when we started to explore, crystal healing, and working with those energies as well. And then when we came back to New York, it just so happens that one of our close friends had someone in her building who was offering a free Reiki teaching. So we both, it was sort of like very casual, like, oh, my friend is doing a Reiki teaching and it's free. Do you guys want to get certified? And we were like, sure, why not? So then once we started working with that energy, I think for me, and I don't know, Nuja, you can share your experiences, but I know for me, I definitely started to really understand and feel how, I guess, what they call Reiki, universal life force energy, and how, ways that you can utilize it to heal.
Yeah, I think that definitely opened up, kind of like another world, the energy healing. At the same time, I had been practicing yoga for a while, and I think that also eventually led me to explore things like Ayurveda and meditation. And it was just kind of like the culmination of all of those things, the energy healing, the yoga practice, being more mindful, starting to explore meditation, that kind of got me back in touch with that spirituality that had been lost for so many years.
Yeah, so that's really interesting about how your paths really coincided in that particular way. Like in my case, as I was going through this spiritual awakening, that's also the same time it was during a career change for me. So I had a degree as a pharmacist. I was working in pharmacy and retail pharmacy for several years, almost about a decade. And it just wasn't for me. Like I felt like it wasn't a good use of my creativity and also like what I like to do, which is more research into things. So since then, like during that time is when I really like stopped that, and I went back to school, and this was for pharmacology. Because that was my in was pharmacy, so I figured I could at least get into pharmacology. But what I really wanted to do was, in particular, cancer research and understand the genetics of cancer. So now, like fast forward 15 years after this, I'm a cancer geneticist who works on treating cancers, in particular prostate cancer. So all of this first happened when I was. So all of this started, I guess, was you could say it was triggered by my spiritual awakening that I had, that I just couldn't go on in the same like area that I was going in. Like I needed to really live out like what I came here to do, and that is to like do this work to try to like actually heal people. Like my path, I feel, is one of an alchemist, of a healer. So that's what really has driven me over the years, and that's something that is even reflected in my career choice and the one that I made after I had my spiritual awakening, going from like retail pharmacy to genetics of cancer to try to actually make a difference. So I think like in each of our own ways, like opening ourselves up to the spiritual did help us immensely to find what we were good at and what we are here to do.
Wow, Ryan, as you're talking, I'm realizing that every spiritual awakening that I just talked about also coincided with a career transition. And it's so funny. That's something I honestly never made that connection before at this moment. 2008 was when I started like the path for nursing school. I was taking like my prereq classes. I believe 2010 is the year that I actually started. And then around 2014, 2015, I became a psychiatric nurse practitioner, which is what I do now. And then it's funny because I'm actually currently in the middle of a huge career transition. And I believe it is also, of course, coinciding with yet another awakening that I'm going through. Similar to what Ryan said about that feeling of being like so completely misaligned with the work that you're doing. I've kind of been feeling that way for like the last year or so. I would say that this awakening was definitely one that was in some way influenced by me starting to work with plant medicine, which I definitely feel is a huge part of my path, both my own healing path and then potentially part of my path maybe one day as a healer myself. But yeah, as I started to delve into this world of plant medicine and seeing how healing it is, it really made me start to feel completely constricted by my current role as someone who, you know, prescribes medication for mental health disorders, and just starting to see the limitations of that. And at the same time, I feel like over the last few years, I've been kind of building my other skills. You know, I became a Reiki master, a meditation and mindfulness teacher, also studied like Ayurveda and holistic health. Holistic health is another huge passion of mine. So yeah, I'm finding that now I'm leaning more towards wanting to work in all of those, you know, same healing modalities that were so influential for my own spiritual awakening, because I really feel like we are like in the age of awakening right now, and there are so many people that are going through this.
So speaking of plant medicine, when I had some of those experiences that I told you about, actually even before then, like back when I was like really just starting, before I had any of these like wild experiences, I had a dream, and in the dream it wasn't a lucid dream, but it was a very vivid dream, and in it I met a goddess. So I found out like 6 years later that this was my primary goddess. Her name is Akate. But anyway, in the dream, I went in her cave and she brought me down and she showed me all of these plants and herbs and that kind, and like seeing that, like really, as soon as I woke up, I went out to the store, Home Depot, and started getting all of this stuff to make my own herbs and plant medicines. And I had this huge book on like all different combinations that I could make, and I decided to start making my own elixirs that you guys have experienced. You've tried them, I'm
They're
sure.
amazing. Yes.
So that was one thing that I really got into as well when I first started the path. And it was because I had this really super vivid dream. And I'm like, wow, I should really do this. And I got books on alchemy and plant alchemy in particular. And like I was making all of these elixirs. And since I had that huge compendium, it was like a big book that from pharmacy, I was able to really do some intense research on different plants and see which ones were safest, which ones were efficacious, and had like effects that might be good together. So I was making some combinations that I felt driven to make, and like a lot of these really helped with certain things. Like I made one to aid in my digestion that I actually still take to this day.
So do I.
Yeah, I just took it last weekend because my stomach was upset, and it's like one of my go-tos. I've been using it now for about 14 years. I made one to enhance your mitochondrial activation or your cellular respiration, and that's something that we kind of like talk about as a hangover cure, because when you take it and you drink too much, all of a sudden like you feel not only do you feel sober,
You
but
feel
like your
better than
senses,
sober.
yeah, like your senses actually are heightened when you take this, even if you're drunk like 10 seconds before.
Yes.
You just kind of, the fog of alcohol is just kind of lifted. So it's like these, with plants in particular, there's so many different uses that we don't really know about, because you can't really study them in science too much, because like with science is very reductionist. So basically you find an ingredient that might have a specific effect, and then from there then you would kind of alter the chemistry a little bit, but you lose the overall holistic effects that are caused by several compounds working together in synergy. And that's something that is very known in organic chemistry and taught by organic chemists, because we want to be able to preserve as much of that synergy as possible. But it's really hard without like actually having the herbs on you. So like if you are skilled in plant medicine, and or if you know somebody that has these skills, especially combined with like a Western perspective too, or an Ayurvedic background, because they're probably some of the best as far as knowing which plants to combine. Some Chinese medicine, all very, very skilled, all in different ways. So I don't want to say just Western medicine, because these people aren't trained in Western medicine, and yet they're extremely skilled in their medicines work. So that is something that is really interesting, and I'd like to see more of that coming to fruition in the West, because like it really helps, especially with prevention and in overall wellness. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I feel that that is a very important part of not only just spirituality but science. And in this podcast, we're bridging that gap, and like we want the best of both worlds here.
Yes. Oh my God, I love that. And speaking of which, Ryan, you just reminded me about a conversation that I had with my acupuncturist, and she's, Chinese and into like TCM, traditional Chinese medicine and the herbs and all of that, Eastern medicine. And she was telling me how, she has a theory that Chinese medicine came from the aliens because, like, how do they have all of this information about like so many different herbs and so many different combinations, and how quickly it all, came to fruition. Like she was telling me there's no way that humans, found this. It must have come to us from the aliens. And I have to say, I completely agree with her. Do a little bit more research into that and get back to you guys with some tangible evidence of that. But also, yeah, I mean, speaking of, potions, which again, like Ryan said, his are literally amazing and life changing. Like we've been using them for years. But, it's just funny how we all kind of went through an alchemy phase, because Nujat and I also had a phase where we were doing, making like our own potions, more so, for like skincare and essential oils and things like that. But I remember we had, our chakra balancing oils and, facial serums and like all these things, also using herbs and essential oils. So I think it's interesting. I never really thought about the fact that like we all had like a little bit of like an alchemist sort of phase that we went through.
Yeah, and it's cheap too to get the ingredients. So once you have the equipment to make it, then the ingredients themselves are actually pretty cheap. And a lot of times, like for, I guess the most crude preparation, all you need is a little bit of the dried herb and some alcohol. And there's a lot of substitutes for alcohol if you want to get more refined. But like if you want to really just start with something, just very cheap alcohol, like the 80% or higher, like the grain alcohol is actually best for that. And then you could kind of like work with the percentage of alcohol and water. For example, if you know that some of the compounds in your herb that are medicinal are more aqueous versus more lipophilic, which is lipid soluble or fat soluble, then you could use more water versus more alcohol for the more fat soluble ones. So you could really play with it and kind of test it and test it on yourself. Obviously, like you do have to be careful because with herbs, there are always warnings. Nothing is always 100% safe. So do your due diligence first. But like there's a lot of room for experimentation. And it's a cheap hobby to have too because it's so cheap to get just one bottle of alcohol and use that for several different concoctions. And you could just buy dried herbs very cheap from a lot of places, local stores, Etsy, several websites on the web. Like you can get some dried herbs very cheap just to test and play with.
I love that. I think we have to have an episode maybe going more into depth on that, Ryan.
Yeah, hopefully you guys got a good insight into our backgrounds, our interests, our spiritual paths. I think we touched a lot of topics here between astral projection, aliens, shadow work, herbs, and these are definitely some topics that we're going to be exploring and going more into depth on in future episodes. But yeah, I think we'll wrap it up here, and hopefully you enjoyed learning a little bit more about us. And in our next episode, you'll be hearing us talk about dreams. So stay tuned for that. And until next time.
See you on our next podcast of Spiritual Shenanigans. Goodbye. See you next time.